No witnesses for the defense's case, more digital evidence of prostitution and sex trafficking, and new audio messages from the man at the center of this federal criminal case, Sean Diddy Combs. It is a full recap of day 28 of the trial. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan, they're investigating claims that patients were improperly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head on over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. All right, so let's talk about what happened today in court, day 28. Let me bring back in Law&Crime's in-court reporter, Elizabeth Millner, who's been there every day for all of the testimony, all of the action. Elizabeth, always great to see you. Thank you so much. So first up, we found out about scheduling, right? We found out when both sides are going to be finishing up, when the jury might be handed over the case. We even found out how long each side's going to have for closing arguments, which, by the way, I will tell you, I think it's one of the most important parts of this entire trial, given how complicated it is and how many different elements there are and how much the jury has to consider, and putting it all into context. Closing arguments so important. So what do we learn about scheduling?
Yeah, well, we learned that this case is wrapping up very quickly. I think in a way that's kind of shocking to even myself, where it's like, oh my God, we're really at the beginning of the end. Because from what both parties were explaining in court today, it seems like both sides are ready and geared up for closing arguments to happen as soon as Thursday. And yes, Jesse, both sides are going to have plenty of time to get their final message to the jurors before they go and deliberate. And so each side will have an abundance of time, pretty much 4 hours for each side. And so the day, as far as Thursday goes, it should take up most of the day for closings, because at 4 hours each, that's 8 hours, probably a lunch break in between. So we should see closings happen all day on Thursday. And then because they're going to be taking up most of the duration on Thursday, we can expect that the jury won't even get the case until Friday. And so things are moving pretty quickly. Now, whether or not the jury actually comes to a verdict on Friday, that's a wait and see. But for the most part, we can kind of finally see the beginning of the end with this case.
Yeah, 4 hours each for closings. I think they'll probably want all that time. I know that the first thing that's going to happen after the defense, after the prosecution finishes up their case, the defense is going to have this Rule 29 motion where basically after the prosecution, the government closes its case. They basically say, Judge, there's nothing for the jury to consider. You look at everything that was presented. You have to enter a judgment of acquittal on these charges because the evidence presented is insufficient to sustain a conviction. Probably not going to be successful for them. And then you move into the defense's case, which, by the way, we found out about that too. I mean, there was a point when we thought the defense was going to call a number of witnesses. Is that not true anymore? Are they not calling any witnesses? Are they just putting on, what, exhibits or something?
Yeah, it seems like there was kind of a lot of mixed messaging this morning in terms of whether or not the defense will call witnesses or whether or not they'll just put in a bunch of exhibits, and that'll kind of be the most of their case in chief. But from my understanding of it all, they still plan to call at least maybe one, maybe two witnesses. That is my understanding of everything. I know a lot of people would rather this case kind of wrap up and everything quickly, but it seems, again, from my understanding, that the defense at least plans to put on a couple of witnesses. Now, whether or not one of those witnesses is Sean Combs, I doubt that's going to happen, mainly because they plan on summations or closing arguments to be happening on Thursday. But initially, Jesse, they had kind of, I wouldn't say a laundry list, but they had a long, lengthy list of witnesses that they were possibly planning on calling. Now, obviously, that dwindled all the way down. And then initially, when we were kind of getting towards the end of the government's case, the defense was like, okay, we plan on calling Dr. Bardet, we plan on calling Vashta, we plan on calling another witness. And then it seems like that three-person witness list already trickled down probably to maybe one or two of those folks, possibly Vashta Dunlap, possibly Dr. Bardet. So we'll wait and see when the defense takes over for their case. But for the most part, it seems like the defense case isn't going to be lasting as long as they initially anticipated, when they initially thought it would be at least maybe 2 to 5 trial days. It seems like for the most part, it'll be just a day, maybe even a day and a half.
Yeah, some outlets are reporting that the defense is not planning on calling any witnesses, so we're getting mixed messaging. I'm happy you were there to straighten it out for us, because I'll tell you, I think it's interesting. If they call no witnesses or they call a limited amount of witnesses, it says something about how they feel about this case. They might feel that through cross-examination of key witnesses, key prosecution witnesses, and maybe just some of the text messages that came out, enough reasonable doubt has formed. There's nothing more for them to do. Now, you talked about Sean Combs not taking the stand. Yeah, as of right now, based on the scheduling, doesn't appear he's going to take the stand. However, he could wake up tomorrow. It's his decision and his decision alone. He could wake up tomorrow and say, no, I want to tell my side of the story. His attorneys can't stop him. He will take the stand. It's up in the air. Probably not going to do it, particularly after the scheduling today, but we'll see. I've been shocked before. Maybe I'll be shocked again. Now, after all the scheduling, now after what we can anticipate for the rest of the week, we saw the continued testimony of this special agent for Homeland Security investigations, this summary witness, literally summarizing or condensing a lot of the digital evidence in this case. And it seems to me that the prosecutors are really trying to illustrate that the connective thread, this connective thread with Sean Combs, his associates, and Jane, alleged victim 2 in this case, to set up all of these wild king nights. So you're really placing Sean Combs in the middle of it. Not that he can't say, oh, I don't know what was being set up on my behalf. I showed up at a hotel room and I'm shocked to find what I found. Not so quite. And it's either that he was an integral part of this, assuming at the very least these were sites of prostitution, which is, transportation to engage in prostitution. The allegation being that he transported sex workers and alleged victims for the purposes of sex work, or at the worst case for him, that these are sites of sex trafficking. So Elizabeth, before we even get into the audio tapes of Sean Combs, I want to ask you about that separately. So I understand more flight records and the payment of travel. This was all discussed, as well as setting up the rooms for these sexual episodes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Jesse, I will say this about some of the summary charts that the jury was able to see today. It was something that a lot of us in the gallery weren't able to see because it had a lot of sensitive information, specifically relating to Jane. And so, unfortunately, for the most part, especially at the beginning of the day, we didn't see all of these charts and graphs that were all put together. But I was able to try to jot down as much as I could, especially as Maureen Comey was kind of going pretty fast with this witness. But, for example, we heard about one particular kind of flight summary chart that was between September 24th of 2022 and September 25th of 2022. And the location was Mapleton Home, which is Diddy's residence over in Los Angeles, as well as in Vegas, too, where the names associated with that particular time frame were Jane, Sean Combs, and Paul being an entertainer that Jane and Sean Combs would use in their hotel nights. And so the jury was able to see kind of financial records, that being $2,500 that was sent over to Paul. The flight records, I wasn't able to write it down as fast as I possibly could, but there were flight records that were attached to that. But then also there were just more charts just really talking about the payment. So, for example, there was one payment from September 17th of 2023 through September 19th of 2023. It was about a hotel booking, particularly the Trump Hotel in New York and the Whitby Hotel too. The names associated with that particular booking were Jane, Sean Combs, Robert, and Cabral. And then Jane, she had a flight out from LAX to JFK, Cabral from Atlanta to Newark, and then Newark back to Atlanta, where the jury was able to see Venmo payments totaling $1,000 that was sent to Robert. Then they were able to see text messages associated with just kind of the financial records associated with Cabral, where Jane texted Cabral saying, I'm going to check on the status of the cash for you. Then we see more things, or we hear about more charts that have to do with Jonathan Perez, one of Sean Combs' assistants, Jane and Cabral. It was assigned to the Trump Hotel, room 0508. The arrival date was around that same time frame, September 17th of 2023. And then the payment method was an Amex, and the account holder, that being Sean Combs. And so the jury was able to kind of see all of that, including an American Express credit card bill where there was a charge for the Trump Hotel for $2,597.11, another charge for $2,490.17. They were able to see transportation. It was through Premier Travel and JetBlue obviously being an airline, and that was transportation in relation to Jane. And kind of how she was able to possibly get over here to New York. And then the account holder for that was Jessica Ruiz. However, what we know about Jessica Ruiz is she was a travel agent that Sean Combs would use in order to kind of set up these arrangements. And so their flights were paid for with Amex under Jessica Ruiz's name. That was also under Bad Boy Entertainment, or Bad Boy in general. Then there were just more records for the flight for Cabral, again, around the same time frame, that being September 18th of 2023 through September 19th of 2023. The account holder was under Jane's name. However, there was a wire transfer to Jane Doe from Sean Combs. And so I think that was another kind of point where they were saying, even though the account holder might be assigned to Jane, the money that was coming in, according to the government, was first coming in through a wire transfer from Sean Combs, so that way Jane was able to book this flight or get whoever over to wherever they were going to be in terms of planning for hotel nights. And then there were emails even between Robin Greenhill to Team Combs, where Robin sent a screenshot where the message included in that particular screenshot was, "Hey, please send Jane $5,000. And so the jury was able to see even more charts of services that were received from Brendan Paul, Cabral Williams, travel agency charges, other charges, including just to hotel rooms. And so it was a lot of just charts, first of all, but also just a way for everything to just be in one place in terms of if the flight was booked for this particular date, here are all the financial records associated with that. And it seems like from the government's kind of argument about this all is that all roads kind of lead back to Sean Combs in terms of who was the one paying for all of this to be happening, all for the entertainers, and even in this case for Jane to be coming out to these hotel rooms, and in this case, New York, but also in other places like Los Angeles and Vegas too.
That's why these summary witnesses are so important, because you heard the idea that Sean Combs had been paying or arranging for these workers and their travel and their transport, and also the alleged victims in this case. But it was a little nebulous, it was a little confusing. So now you have a summary witness who really summarizes it, makes it clear, makes it a timeline. And again, this helps support the charges of transportation to engage in prostitution, transporting sex workers and alleged victims for the purposes of sex work. It also helps with racketeering, right? The more that the government can say that Sean Combs was using his inner circle, was using his businesses, was using his resources to facilitate what the government basically says is not only illegal activity, but evidence of sex trafficking, right? They're saying Jane was sex trafficked. That's how you get to racketeering. Which sex trafficking is one of the underlying crimes of racketeering. But it's also, you talk about a criminal agreement, a conspiracy. That's what you need. Him agreeing with others to facilitate this illegal conduct. And of course, the more they show this, the more they're saying it's evidence of sex trafficking of Jane. But I mentioned the inner circle. My understanding, there were messages from Combs' inner circle, right? Which is important for racketeering. Again, the more you say those people, those associates, that security, those assistants were helping him to do that, that is key. What did we learn about the messages from Combs' inner circle? What kind of messages were presented for the jury?
Well, it seems like in addition to just the messages that the jury was able to see between Sean Combs and Jane, or Jane and an entertainer, or Sean Combs and an entertainer, there were still things that were happening kind of behind the scenes in terms of his employees kind of handling everything, so that way the rooms would be ready, that way everyone kind of knew what the plan was for either the weekend or for these hotel nights. And so the jury was able to see a lot more messages, and even heard some audio messages too, just about everything that went into the alleged Combs enterprise kind of planning these hotel nights and what they were doing in terms of that. So for example, there were messages between none other than Christina Coram and Sean Combs, where there were some audio messages that were played. We weren't able to hear those because it was one of those things that was under seal, and then the government was worried about sensitive information relating to Jane being out there. So the first couple of batches of audio messages were headphones only. So unfortunately, we couldn't hear those. But what we did know is KK's response to some of these audio messages that included Christina Coram saying, okay, she's going to come. She'll meet us in Vegas. Sean Combs says, okay. He sends another audio message, again, one that we can't hear. Christina Coram says something along the lines of, whatever you want. By the way, your nightstand has plan B. Sean Combs liked that particular message. He also said, do you think the other girl will come? Christina Coram responds. Sean Combs sends another audio message that we aren't able to hear. And then he also texts something along the lines of "keep homegirl, please." I'm not sure which homegirl he was referring to in those particular messages. But then Christina Coram responds, "Working on drip. Jess will work on rooms. Plan B is a nightstand." And then she kind of listed them out, but they were going so fast that these were all kind of in listicle. So it was like, first, working on drip. Second, we'll work on rooms. Third, plan B is a nightstand. And then Benny the jeweler can get back to us. So that was kind of the gist of that particular message between Christina Coram and Sean Combs. But then there were other messages too between Jane and Christina Coram, where Jane is telling Christina, "Hi, KK. Okay, we spoke." And this was something along the lines of what days are best for her to come and stay. And then we hear about more messages between Sean Combs and Jane, where he's saying, "Good morning, the countdown begins." Jane is saying, "Yay, can't wait." And then more messages just between the assistants, where Jonathan Perez, who was an assistant who had even testified in this particular trial, and Fahim, who was one of Diddy's security guards, where Jonathan Perez messages Fahim and says, "Trump team says there's a private entrance." Fahim responds, "Yes, we're pulling up." Jonathan says, "In the elevator with Jane." But in addition to Jonathan saying that he was in the elevator with Jane, we see messages from Fahim to Jane where he's saying, "We'll be there in 10 minutes with cash." Then Jane messages Cabral, "Hey, I need your driver's license." And then there were messages even between Brendan Paul and the people who set up the IVs. And that's something that dates all the way back to Cassie's lawsuit, where she says these really long and intensive freak-offs, that they would just need these IV drips in order to recover. And according to Jane's testimony, it was kind of the same instance where these hotel nights in her case would go on for days or hours on end, that they would just need IVs in order to just recover from them. And so the jury was able to see text messages between Brendan Paul and the people who set up those IVs, where the people who set up the IVs said, "Good morning, please let me know what type of bags that they would like. Also, are we doing the same IVs on all three?" Then Brendan Paul says, "I'll keep y'all posted. All IVs will be the same." Then Brendan texts about needing Benadryl in the IVs too. And then there were even more messages that included messages between J9 to Fahim, where, and these are both security guards that worked for Sean Combs, where J9 says to Fahim, "ASA, I grabbed 10K from safe for PD. I have it in my possession. I'll let you know when I hand it over." Then there are messages between Sean Combs to Jane, where he says, "I can't have Paul at my house." Jane says, "Yeah, we know, baby." And so it seems, Jesse, that honestly, a lot of text messages were really just showing, just kind of, even though, maybe Sean Combs and Jane were together in a hotel room, they were with whomever inside that hotel room, that there were still kind of workings that were happening on the outside in terms of obtaining the cash, getting the cash to Sean Combs, or even in some instances Jane. And if it wasn't through maybe possibly a wire transfer or Cash App, Venmo, any of that sort, that it would just kind of be cash that would either be left at the hotel or in an envelope, in just a way that was kind of, given to the entertainers in a kind of, a discreet type of way.
Yeah, look, if we say that all of these assistants are offshoots of Sean Combs, it connects him back to these alleged criminal sexual episodes. It helps establish a criminal enterprise. You go to the opening paragraphs of whichever indictment you want to pick, that Sean Combs was using his businesses and his resources and his inner circle and his associates to engage in the sexual exploitation and abuse of women. If the jury accepts that these are instances of sex trafficking, this is key evidence. The text messages are so important, right? The flow of money, the travel receipts, so important. And the more that the jury can accept, everybody knew what was going on. Everybody was on the same page. Everybody knew the goal was to make Sean Combs happy. That's how you get to a common enterprise, right? A common purpose for racketeering. And also it helps with the sex trafficking charge as well. And then we get to the audio messages. So for me, I'm reading the transcript. There's one thing to have text messages, which I think are compelling evidence. But what? To hear Sean Combs' own voice? These audio messages, what are these, voice notes? These voice notes, right, I think were key for the prosecution to tie him further to, again, transportation to engage in prostitution, sex trafficking. If they're tying him to these sexual episodes, setting up these events, paying for these events, what were these audio messages that the jury heard and that you heard?
Yeah, so it was something that, obviously we've been following this case pretty closely. So we all know what Sean Combs sounds like outside of a courtroom, just in any other type of atmosphere outside of the federal court building right behind me. But for the jury, I'm suspecting that most of them haven't really heard Sean Combs' voice outside of this trial. And so it might be interesting for them to kind of hear how he's talking in these audio messages, his demeanor in these audio messages. Because for the most part, Jesse, when we were hearing these audio messages, his tone was either laughing or a little more upbeat. Sometimes you couldn't tell necessarily if he was being sarcastic or if he was being serious. And so it's all about the jurors' respective kind of interpretation of how they feel listening to this. But I thought it was interesting kind of hearing these audio messages that were played. And, we're in 2025. And so a lot of people send voice notes in terms of, not in terms of, but instead of just sending a text message back. And it seems like Sean Combs would often use audio messages or voice messages in order to kind of not get what he wants, but more so ask for what he wants in terms of what he needed for, and in this case, these hotel nights. And so there were messages, audio messages from Sean Combs to Paul, for instance, Paul being an entertainer that they used, where Sean Combs can be heard saying, "Hey, are you in New York? We'll be in Brooklyn tonight." And then Paul later responds that he's actually in Los Angeles. There were some messages that were played at the beginning of court today. Again, it was a bunch of messages, probably about 5, 6, 7 or so messages. And unfortunately, we weren't able to hear, likely because of the sensitive information relating to Jane and possibly her, true identity, which is why they just kept the headphones on, but also because of little technical issues that happened this morning too. But there were more audio messages where Sean Combs is saying to Paul, "Hey, yo, hit me when you're close," in terms of him coming over to a hotel night, because this particular booking that it fell under was for the L'Ermitage Hotel in Los Angeles, that being from the November 8th of 2021 through November 10th of 2021 kind of time frame. So it was all kind of associated with that particular message. But then there were also messages, not particular message, particular flight. But then there was also messages between Sean Combs and none other than Christina Coram herself. And so there was one particular message that was, again, around that same time frame, November 9th of 2021. So still kind of under that booking for the flight summary chart, where Sean Combs says, "Hey, KK, I don't know why I'm even calling you about this. There's no more baby oil. But yeah, I can't believe I'm looking for baby oil in this mother." There you go. And even when Sean Combs was kind of saying that, I'm not doing it any justice by kind of repeating that, because he said it in kind of like in a joking type of way. And it kind of maybe showed to the jurors, Christina Coram and Sean Combs' relationship in terms of how he was able to just ask her for these types of things, maybe with no questions asked, but in just such a way that was just very light in terms of him asking for more baby oil. And he can't believe that he has to go and search for baby oil, given how many kind of bottles of baby oil were also found. And then there was also another audio message between Christina Coram and Sean Combs. And all the times I'm saying Christina Coram and Sean Combs, it's always Sean Combs sending these messages to Christina Coram. So we're not seeing any type of audio notes or hearing any type of audio messages that are being sent back from Christina Coram. She's always kind of texting back whatever Sean Combs says in an audio message. And so there was one, again, that same day where Sean Combs says, "Yes, and I'm going to need you to hit Young and tell her I had to run out of town like a family emergency." And then there was another audio message, again, that being from Sean Combs to Christina Coram, where he says, "Can I get vegetable soup? Yeah, can security or something bring me some money? I need like $5,000. Can you bring me what I need so I don't have to keep bothering y'all?" And then later he asked in another audio message, can y'all bring me some Cialis?" And so these were just some of the audio messages that were heard from Sean Combs to Christina Coram. But then there were also audio messages from Sean Combs to Frank, for instance. And there was also messages from Sean Combs to Jane where he says, "Yeah, I sent you $15K, baby girl." And then to Frank, he said, "Yeah, make sure you have the room set up the right way." And so, again, these are just typical instances where it seems like Sean Combs was kind of using these audio messages, one, being in the know of kind of what was going on and what the plan was for those evenings in terms of these hotel nights, and just how his employees would kind of help set them up. And if he needed anything else, he would just send an audio note to his respective assistants, but also just messages confirming that he needed money or he needed to send money too.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, one of the most damning ones is, I believe he sent one to his travel agent and goes, "Hey, Jess, I need to get him from Atlanta to here. Let me know, hit me up." if you're talking about transportation to engage in prostitution, and he's literally saying, I need him transported, I need this sex worker transported, that's a problem. And you talk about, I sent you $15K, baby girl, or make sure the room is set up right. Look, on one hand, it easily feeds into the prosecution's narrative that he was at the center of all of this. He was setting all of it up. He knew what was going on. The defense could say, again, all of this is consensual. Nothing about this was illegal. Of course, he was setting up these voyeuristic sexual escapades, but Jane agreed to it. Cassie agreed to it. Everybody agreed to it. And really, if he was the head of this criminal enterprise, if he was engaging in a pattern of illegal conduct, would he have voice messages? Would he have text messages? Wouldn't he try to insulate himself a little bit more? If he's really the mafia king boss, why have all these connective threads? Why have all this digital evidence? Wouldn't he be a lot more careful? I imagine, or I wonder if that's going to come up in closing arguments from the defense. Now, you saw a lot, you heard a lot, but you didn't see everything, right? Because, Elizabeth, I understand that the jury saw more sex tapes while this agent was being questioned by the prosecution, right? I mean, we don't know what those are. You don't get a chance to see them. It's only for the jury's viewing. Can you try to explain what the context was, why they were shown to this agent?
So in terms of the sexually explicit videos that were shown today, it was a lot of videos because it took up a lot of time. And so, no, we cannot see these particular videos. Only the jury can see them. Both parties can see it, the judge, and then the witness can see these particular videos. So the gallery screen was completely shut off. Everyone had headphones on, so they're not playing the audio of these sexually explicit videos just out loud in the courtroom for everyone to pretty much hear. They have these headphones on. It was so silent, Jesse, that really you could hear a pin drop. That's how quiet it was inside the courtroom. But in between just kind of showing the jurors and even the witness these videos, because the witness had already seen these particular videos, what we did learn is just kind of the time frame of when these particular videos were taken. So there were sexually explicit videos, one from November 10th of 2021. The government played about 2 minutes and 30 seconds of it. And the only reason I know that is because AUSA Maureen Comey is like, okay, we're going to play the next 2.5 minutes of this particular video. And so it kind of was that same process throughout all the videos that were shown today. They would show a minute here, 2.5 minutes there, 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And it seems like the entire time, it took maybe probably a good 40 minutes to an hour that the prosecution was playing these videos. And this is bright and early in the morning. So I can only imagine what these jurors were thinking, having to watch these really explicit videos first thing in the morning. But there were also videos shown from December 4th of 2021, December 18th of 2021. And then the government was saying about 50 videos were kind of created within this date range in 2021. There were more videos played from February 8th of 2022, and then the time frame kind of associated with that was from February 12th of 2022. There were Valentine's Day videos that were shown of 2022. August 30th of 2022 videos that were shown, October 8th videos of 2022 that were shown, and that was just kind of what was shown in terms of what the jury saw today. And these were for a good amount of time that the jury was able to see them. But there were more videos related to the sexually explicit videos that were on that chart. For example, from February 7th of 2023 through February 10th of 2023, March 15th of 2023, March 21st of 2023 through March 23rd of 2023, July 4th of 2023, July 31st of 2024 through August 1st of 2024, then August 8th of 2024 being the last sexually explicit video related to that particular chart. And I think it's kind of notable because if you think about it, it's around that time frame that Jane last saw Sean Combs in terms of them doing hotel nights together, but it's even a month prior to his arrest that had happened not even a year ago today. And so the jury was able to see just a lot of videos today. And I will say this, Jesse, when I was kind of trying to get peeks here and there of just maybe their facial expressions, them having any type of emotional reaction, just in general what their demeanor was, I could not get a gauge on what their demeanor truly was, because you're seeing these videos. It's a lot of videos that were shown to them bright and early, and they just really, for the most part, just kind of watched it all. Like, I didn't see anybody just, or they kind of took off their headphones, I think, once the end happened. But as far as like giggling or laughing or just like rolling their eyes, or I couldn't see any of that. But it's also kind of, I had a little bit of an obstructed view. And so for the most part, I could see them kind of just having poker faces while watching these really explicit videos.
They've also seen a lot. They might feel a little numb to seeing more of these videos. I will say, I think the videos are being used for a number of things. First of all, you have to confirm that these events happened. It's one of the things the prosecution has to prove. So if you say, hey, we got the payment, we got the coordination, we got the flights, we got the planning, and then we'll show you these events actually happened. We got evidence of it. It's recorded. We'll show it. And that's not even to account for, do these videos show a sense of duress? Do they show Combs directing Jane in a certain way? Remember, to prove sex trafficking, it's force, fraud, coercion. What did the video show? Is there a sense of unease? Not clear, but it does help as another layer of transportation to engage in prostitution. At the very least, if there are videos of Jane engaging in commercial sex acts with sex workers, you got the video of it, you got the planning of it, it feels like a straightforward path to potentially him getting convicted on that. And if the jury believes that those are episodes of force, fraud, coercion, then that's evidence of sex trafficking. And it's really a way for the prosecution to put this all in a clear timeline now and a clear narrative for the jury to ultimately digest. On top of the fact, does it corroborate what Jane said, what she testified to, how she described the details of these wild king nights? So the videos are very, very important in this case. By the way, I've heard some reporting on this. What is the diddler? I heard the diddler being referenced today. What is diddler?
Well, the diddler is, I think, a cheeky kind of way of kind of making an account name for payments either to Venmo, to Zelle, to Cash App, and I think that was the username associated with Sean Combs, and that being the diddler. And I don't know if that was just kind of funny in reference to that, but that was kind of the gist of just that little account name.
Interesting. Well, again, connective tissue there. Okay, I understand there were text messages between Combs and Jane that were again presented to the jury. I think these are messages we've already seen before, where if you're trying to show through text messages she didn't want a part of these sexual episodes anymore, whether she felt disrespected, whether she felt that she wasn't getting the same treatment as another love interest of Sean Combs. Weren't those messages once again presented to the jury under direct examination of this agent?
Yeah, they were. And these were messages particularly from October 16th of 2023. But even before that, Jane had expressed that she was just kind of sick and tired of doing these hotel nights, according to her testimony. But I think what's interesting is the government showing these particular messages from October of 2023, because if you guys think about it in context, in terms of when Cassie had filed her lawsuit, she filed her lawsuit a month after these text messages were shown. So I think, in terms of people possibly thinking that there was apprehension only after Cassie filed her lawsuit, it seemed like this was even kind of a thought in Jane's head even prior to Cassie's lawsuit. Again, something that she had testified to. But these were messages, to your point, Jesse, that we have seen before, that the jury has seen before. But I think just kind of putting it all together in one particular place is where kind of the government was going with this. So these messages were between Jane and Sean Combs on October 16th of 2023, where Jane writes, "I don't want to be effed and mistreated. I don't feel like performing loveless, cold sex." And then she also says, "I need a break. It's loveless for me and nothing satisfies you. You want me to perform oral sex while you jet off with Gina or Young," and presuming that she means Young as in Young Miami. So just showing that apprehension that she was having, because these dates were before Cassie had filed her lawsuit. And I know there's been kind of discussion, not in court, but kind of on the outside of people thinking, okay, she's only feeling this type of way after Cassie's lawsuit. But according to these messages, again, messages that we've seen before, but again, the government kind of putting this all into context, all into one big place altogether, kind of associating these with hotel nights and just doing them either before the fact or before these dates, after these dates, where she is explaining that she doesn't want to be doing this anymore, that she just feels mistreated. She feels like a sex worker. She feels like a prostitute, those types of things, that she was just kind of explaining that she just didn't want to feel this way anymore, and was conveying it to Sean Combs too. Before
we wrap things up with the direct examination of this agent from Homeland Security, there was something that came up with, I think it's Cowboys for Angels, right? This escort service that's come up during the course of this trial. Diddy was upset about a charge?
Yeah, it was interesting kind of reading these text messages, because when we think about Cowboys for Angels, or at least when I was thinking about Cowboys for Angels, I always associated with Cassie and Garen. But for these particular messages that the jury was able to see and that we were able to hear, it seems that Sean Combs also kind of planned out and kind of helped in the booking of escorts too, that we're actually able to see in text message forms. So these were between Sean Combs and Bridget. Bridget works for Cowboys for Angels, where Sean Combs is messaging Bridget, hey, do you have entertainment in New York City? Bridget responds, I can try. Sean Combs responds, who is this? And then Bridget says, it's Bridget and Betsy. And then Sean Combs writes to her, okay, well, stop raising my rates. I'm a longtime customer. And then Bridget responds, well, the rates depend on the guy. I'm contractually obligated to go by the rates on their website. So even after Bridget was kind of expressing that the rates depend on the guy, Sean Combs writes, okay, all good. Let's do 1 a.m. at the Trump Hotel. Then there were more messages kind of down the line too, where Sean Combs is writing to Bridget, okay, 2 a.m. And then Bridget writes back to Sean Combs, good morning. There was a mistake with the cash. You're $600 short. You can Cash App or Zelle. And then Sean Combs responds, he couldn't even perform. And I think that was kind of a big standout moment, at least for me, when these messages were being read out loud, because I think the assumption was that they're not there to do these types of performances if you're thinking about it in a legal sense. But it seemed that Sean Combs was voicing his frustration that this particular entertainer was not able to perform in the way that he wanted in terms of why he was being paid, or why he needed to cough up the extra $600 in cash. And then Bridget responds, okay, well, you're paying for their time. Then Sean Combs responds to her, whoa, talk to me nice. I'm a longtime customer. And then Bridget later says, well, Grant might be available. And then Sean Combs says, who's that? Bridget sends a photo of who this Grant's entertainer is. And so it was one of those instances where I think the defense at some points during this trial have kind of been like, okay, this was not what they were doing in terms of using these entertainers for possibly ways of prostitution, but in terms of just these messages that were read out loud in court, while the government was still had their witness on, talking about, oh, this person couldn't perform. Why do I have to pay extra money? I'm a longtime customer. I think it kind of also goes to their argument a little bit that everyone was, or not everyone, but that Sean Combs was in the know of why these particular entertainers were there and what services that they were actually there to provide.
Yeah, it doesn't really go in line with what I believe the defense said in their opening statement. He paid them for their time and experience. Doesn't seem to be what he paid them for, which, again, it goes to the idea of how exactly do you defend yourself from transportation to engage in prostitution if there is this mountain of evidence where you are a central part of the payment and transportation of these individuals and the alleged victims in this case for sex work. Again, really, really important summary witnesses. So it did become a time for cross-examination, the defense having an opportunity to question this agent, this summary witness. Where did the cross-examination go today?
Well, the cross-examination, at first I was kind of like, where is this kind of going to go? But right off the bat, by the way, everyone, the cross-examination was done by Tenny Garagos. And so right off the bat, Tenny Garagos is presenting this witness with a stipulation. It was about records from TriStar Sports and Entertainment Group, but also Cowboys for Angels, which kind of goes by a false name of Collins Productions, too. And then they bring about their records chart, where the defense talks about the account holder column on these particular records, which lists Sean Combs and Jessica Ruiz, who is the travel agent, but also that under the account holder, it listed her as the CE Co. LLC. So she kind of falls under all of that altogether. And it was interesting kind of watching the cross-examination at the beginning, because Diddy is kind of nodding along with Tenny Garagos as she's cross-examining this witness. But then I was kind of like, okay, well, where are we going to go with this kind of from here? And so Tenny Garagos asked, well, it lists Jane's name and accounts receivable as Sean Combs. And then the witness responds, yes. Well, the account holder for the visa is Jane. And then the witness replies, yes. And so then the jury is able to see an exhibit from September of 2023. It was kind of a records document and a particular invoice, but the government never showed this particular witness this particular invoice. So I think kind of similar to the last summary witness that testified, that was a government witness, that I think the defense is kind of like, well, the government's not showing you every single document associated with these dates and these times. And so I think that was something that they were kind of staying true to even for this witness too. And so the jury was able to see the flights chart exhibit once again, where the defense is kind of pointing out the row where the witness listed Cassie's lawsuit and then the apology video, but there's no record of Jane's lease agreement, and that particularly happening in April 4th of 2023. And the witness never saw the lease agreement that kind of helped Jane get the home that she now has that is being paid for, as we now know, still by Sean Combs. And then they start to get into just the flights and just kind of everything that is associated with those particular summaries. For example, one particular flight from September 30th of 2023. It was in Miami, Florida. The names associated with this were Jane and Sean Combs. However, there was no third party. And so it was really just talking about Jane coming specifically over to Sean Combs's Miami residence, but there was no third party in terms of possibly an entertainer or an escort also being involved too. And so there were about 5 months between the first two rows in the chart. So for example, it was from May 22nd of 2021, and then it all of a sudden went to October 29th of 2021. And I think maybe the defense was trying to point out there just the long kind of time frame in terms of why these particular dates weren't shown. But during the government's during the direct testimony of this particular witness, the government pointed out that there weren't every single dates that hotel nights occurred, that Jane and Sean Combs were together, or that an entertainment was there with them on this particular chart, or else we'd still be in this trial probably for weeks on end if they listed every single chart that was available. And so, or every single date that was available. So then the jury, the defense got into more text messages for the jury to see. These were texts from Jane to Sean Combs, where Sean Combs is saying, okay, well, what do you want to do? And this was a particular message that was shown under a government exhibit. And so what the defense is saying was just that those text messages that were shown under the government exhibit weren't the full kind of scope of what these messages really kind of entailed. So, for example, Jane first wrote, "I'm horny for you." And then Sean Combs responds, "What do you want to do?" And then Jane sent text messages about needing some outfits, and that she sent a bunch of explicit, sexually explicit text messages to Sean Combs. And then the text messages were only shown to the witness and to the jury, so we weren't able to see everything. So I'm really only writing down what I'm able to hear. But there were more messages. They kind of jump ahead to November 6th of 2021, where Jane is messaging Cabral, "Hey, how are you?" Cabral is saying, "Hey, what's up, love?" About to shoot like a video or something with his friend. And then Jane says, "Want to come over?" Cabral responds the next day, "Hey, baby, how are you?" Jane says the next day, "Hey, cutie, how are you?" Sheesh, you need to come with a warning sign. And then the defense is kind of talking about the emojis that were associated with the messages that Jane sent. So, for example, under the Cellbrite report, or just some of the extractions that the government was able to do, the emojis don't transfer into these particular extractions. So the jury's not able to see the emojis when the government is presenting these under a witness. But with the defense and the way that they are able to extract these text messages, they are able to see emojis. So I think they were trying to say that emojis kind of put more context into possibly what Jane how Jane kind of felt about doing these hotel nights, where she's sending kissy faces and winky faces and smiley faces and bunches of hearts too, where she's also sending kind of a water emojis and kissy faces. And then she messages Cabral, "Hey, thank you for being so sweet and such a gentleman, safe travels." And so then the defense presents their own kind of, not version of these hotel night videos, but are kind of pointing out the time codes that they wanted to present to the jury. And so the jury was able to see more sexually explicit videos from these hotel nights. The ones that the defense showed were from November 10th of 2021. I see kind of Diddy passing some notes over to Tenny Garagos while this video is playing. And again, for people who aren't inside the courtroom, we're not able to hear these videos, and just we're not able to hear the parties involved in these particular videos because the jury is wearing headphones, the judge is wearing headphones, the witness is wearing headphones, and both parties are wearing headphones, including the defendant. So they're able to hear everything, see everything. However, we inside the gallery are not able to see it. They turn off all the monitors, so we can't see a thing. And so Then after these video plays, or after the videos played, and it was a couple of videos that was played, then the defense kind of brings about Jane's messages to Cabral, talking about how she was getting flashbacks and she was sending drooling emojis, and how she reached out to Cabral where she's saying, hey, thinking ahead, you might need a PCR test. And then Jane is saying, hey, forgot to ask you, do you have a passport? And so I think what the defense was trying to go for here was just that Jane was kind of initiating and seems like she was willing to participate in these, and that she even went so far as having like kind of a good nurtured relationship even with these entertainers, where she's saying things like, hey, good morning, hey baby, how are you, hey cutie, those types of things. And then obviously the accompanying emojis that came with those messages too.
Yeah, it was similar to how they cross-examined that other summary witness, right? The jurors need more context. These charts are limited. And you're saying Combs is using financial control to induce Jane into these sex acts, but is that exactly what's going on when you look at some of these exhibits? And maybe not using his businesses to pay or arrange for hotel nights. It's not a criminal enterprise. It's more of a personal thing. It's more of a personal thing that he wants to engage in, and, you know, trying to defeat against the racketeering claim, because you need a criminal enterprise for racketeering. And look, the Jane messages, they came up before, they came up again. It makes this case not a black and white case of a sex trafficker and victim. It makes it a lot grayer. The idea that she had choice, she had agency, it was consensual, especially how she's, you know, talking with these male performers. It's a problem for the prosecution, and it's ultimately being highlighted once again by the defense. Now, I understand that this witness is going to be continued to be cross-examined tomorrow, so we're going to have the more of this testimony. The prosecution's going to wrap up their case. As I mentioned, the defense is going to probably move forward with a Rule 29 motion to, motion for an acquittal, try to get this case thrown out. Probably not going to be successful. We'll see what kind of defense they put up, whether or not Sean Combs will actually take the stand. And then we were moving towards the conclusion of this case. We're going to be wrapping things up relatively soon, and I have no idea how long the jury will ultimately deliberate once they're handed the case, but I feel fairly confident to say it's going to take them some time. We put up a poll on Law&Crime's YouTube page when we were doing the lunchtime show. The majority of people agree, and this is what I said, that the jury deliberation is going to take minimum 2+ days. So, minimum 2 days, maybe longer. I think it's going to take some time. There's a lot they have to get through. Racketeering alone, there are so many underlying predicate crimes that the prosecution has been trying to prove. The prosecution needs to prove at least 2. They could spend the full day on racketeering alone. So we'll see. I could be wrong. Don't think I am, but I could be wrong. Elizabeth Millner, great seeing you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.